And hello, folks. Once again, it is Friday. It is On My Mom Mind podcast with CR and Adrian. And once again, we go into the breach. You may see a couple of familiar faces today. We have Adrian, and we also have Doc Z with us. We're going to be talking about a subject that has quite a controversy around it. I figured the three of us would talk about it because we lived in the area where this happened. But this event happened in 1971. So let's go ahead and do our introductions. Adrian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, but I just want to crack up on this topic because I'm like, if you walked in the forest and you ate magic mushrooms and then you went to like a huge pot party and smoked the heaviest dope in the room, you would come up with this story about Dan Cooper.
All right. And what do you think, Doc Z?
Well, being that I am Dan Cooper,
The new one.
Really in a big vault downstairs.
Yeah, well, FBI is going to be knocking at the door in 3.
Hello, boys. Come on.
You know, hun, I know we're looking older. I mean it. So evident in the mirror and on the video camera. But there's no way you could be Dan Cooper because, well, let's say Dan Cooper was 30 when he did the hijacking back in 71. He'd be 83 years old. So you look better than an 83-year-old.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to confess I was born in 1960.
So you are not Dan Cooper.
I am not Dan Cooper.
Survey says.
Yeah. Just ask me, I can do the math.
Right. So, well, let's go ahead and jump into this. It's probably going to take a little bit to unpack this all and get everybody caught up to snuff on it. But so we're going to be going back in the time machine here to November 24th of 1971. So Thanksgiving Day of 1971. And I would say it's probably around, maybe noon, 1 o'clock. And we're in Portland, Oregon at the airport. And you can just imagine it. There's a bunch of people, you'd think you'd already be where you needed to be, but people are showing up for Thanksgiving or leaving. So there was a flight scheduled for 2:50 in the afternoon Pacific time to fly up to Seattle Tacoma Airport, SeaTac. A gentleman walks in wearing just a standard run of the mill business suit with a rope tie, with a tie tack, with sunglasses. He walks up to the Northwest Orient counter and he plops down, get this, he plops down a $20 bill and buys a ticket for the connector between Portland and SeaTac.
Wow.
And get this, pre 9/11, no security whatsoever. And this plane loaded on the tarmac.
So CR.
Yeah.
Let me get this in my mind. I'm kind of unpacking it as you talk about this. So I can go to the counter, plop down cash, which is not, of course, not traceable. You could probably do it today as well. But then what's significant is they don't check my ID. So I could put
pre-check.
Yeah, I could put him Elvis Presley or whatever. Right. And if the person in front of me doesn't want to challenge me, then I'm Elvis Presley.
They didn't care who you were as long as you had the money.
Right. Well,
$20.
Yeah.
When he signed his name for the ticket, he signed it D. Cooper. They don't know where, a lot of people don't know where the D.B came from. Maybe it was a smudge or something, but he originally, like on the original ticket, it says D. Cooper.
Yep. CR. Did it say D or did it say Dan? I don't remember.
Some people say it was an abbreviation, so it was D. Cooper. A lot of people say he wrote down Dan Cooper, which would go to show with the picture of the comic you have there, which that was it. That was a popular comic.
Right. Dan Cooper was a super cool comic dude who'd parachute into danger and was the hero of the hour in
France.
Jumping out of planes. Well, I don't know. Is it in France or did I just pick a French?
Right.
I don't know. But yeah, it could have been in French.
Yep. So, like I was saying, he no security check.
No ID check.
No ID check.
That's the thing here is that Dan Cooper is a totally fictitious name.
Definitely.
And nobody checks it, right?
Right.
In 1971. So I'm like,
yep.
And forgive me for thinking this, but there was part of myself today that went, oh, that would have been cool.
Well, I mean, I can remember a time, when Dad and I would come pick you up from the airport. We'd park the car, we'd walk through security, and we get to sit at the gate.
Oh, yeah.
Without purchasing a ticket.
Pre 9/11, right?
Right. So he buys his ticket, no security, no ID check. And like I was saying, there's no jet bridge on this one. So he's walking down a set of stairs on
What
the
do you mean by that?
Old school. They walk out on the tarmac.
Yep.
Okay, like today, unless you're getting a really small flight,
right.
You don't have to walk on the tarmac. But what you're saying is like back then, pretty much it happened.
Certain domestic flights, you would walk out onto the tarmac, or you would go in, get on a bus, and they would bus you out to the plane.
But this is a 757, so this isn't a small plane.
This is actually
a big plane.
This is actually a 727-100.
727.
Yeah.
Why was I thinking 57? Okay.
The 27-100 was the first iteration of the 727.
Gotcha.
And this, so no jet bridge being extended to it. Now you're thinking, okay, how are they getting on? Do they have a set of stairs that are rolled up? Well, actually, something that was interesting about this 727, the early ones, is they had a set of aft stairs that would drop out of the tail, and that's how you would get onto the plane. That's how you would board and deboard. So everybody gets on board. This is Northwest Orient Flight 305, FAA tail number November 467. So for the av geeks out there, that's really cool to have the tail number. But it's a Boeing 727-100 with a rear staircase.
Wow. All the times that you guys either took me to the airport or picked me up, and I rode on some good-sized planes. Never would I have ever boarded in a staircase in the rear of the plane.
Right.
But you're saying with the flights as they were at this time period in 71, that was common.
Yeah, it was commonplace. Yep. At least at the smaller, and Portland, I think if I remember right, Portland's not really international.
I'm thinking it is. But I could be wrong, Chris.
Probably one of the smaller airports.
I could be mixing it with Seattle or where else did I go a lot. It was
even in Rochester, they were from the ground up a ladder into the plane.
Yeah, and you know what, guys? I've taken a lot of these flights where you had to go walk out and go on the tarmac and then walk up the steps, but it was typically a puddle jumper between Minnesota and North Dakota. And then, of course, we'd always have a blizzard because our consulting director would like schedule us to go to North Dakota in like February. I'm like, oh my God.
Right.
Yeah. And so I've been there many times, but never on a big plane. Never.
Right. So he goes out to the tarmac, boards the air stairs. His seat is 18E. And that back in those times, the back of the plane was smoking section. You could actually, and that's got to blow people's minds for today too. I mean, back in the 70s, all the way up until the early 80s, they had smoking sections on a plane.
CR, when I first came from Spokane to meet Doc Z and his family in Minneapolis, they had smoking section on the plane. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. So he sat down 18E. Now on this flight, you had a crew of 6. Pilot was Captain William Scott. Co-pilot was Bob Ratzik. Flight engineer was Harold Anderson. And then we had 3 flight attendants: Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffer. Remember the name Tina Mucklow because she was the stewardess that had direct contact with D.B Cooper. So within the crew of 6, you have 37 passengers that are going from Portland, Oregon to SeaTac. Plane loads, and promptly at 2:50, engine start up, they taxi, they get clearance, and they take off. After departure, Mr. D.B Cooper orders a bourbon and 7, which is brought to him by Tina Mucklow. And as soon as she hands him that drink, he hands her a pre-written note. And so she goes back to her jump seat and she reads the note, and roughly the note says something to the lines of, "I have a bomb. Come sit with me. I'll use it if I have to." So let's just think about that. I mean, this is 2:50 in the afternoon. This flight originated, these people's workday originated in Washington, D.C. early morning. So they've come up the eastern seaboard. They even made a stop through Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then they flew out to Spokane and then out to Portland. And this was their last run of the day. So just put that in your mind, is you've worked this, 10, 12-hour day. This is your last leg. And you hand this guy a drink and he hands you a piece of paper. You sit down and you read it. And, is this a joke? What's going on? So she's got that in her mind. So she gets up, she sits down next to him. His brand of cigarettes were Rallies. So he's probably smoking a Rally, talking to her. And he just matter-of-factly says, "Well, here it is." And he pulls open his attaché case and shows her there's a couple of lumps with a bunch of wires and maybe an egg timer. It's all speculation because they've never found that attaché case and they've never found the presumed bomb. So it's just presumption on what it was. Could have been a bomb, could have been a bunch of stuff put together. But anyway, here's what we're going to do. Hands her another note and says, "I need you to go up to the cockpit." So she grabs this note and goes up to the cockpit. And at that time, it was not a secure cockpit in the air. So she just walks in, I'm assuming, and hands Captain Scott this note. and the note demands for them to land at SeaTac. Also demands $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. Now, mind you, it's a 727 with an air stair. So at this point, I'm thinking that he probably knew what he was going to do, and he knew the aircraft he had to do it off of. So Captain Scott, while they're in the air, calls SeaTac and declares a hijacking, and in that instance, as soon as a hijacking is declared, FBI is contacted, and they're going to want to know how many POB or how many persons aboard you have. So they would tell them 6 crew plus, the 37. And then the biggest thing for the government is, okay, they're in Portland, they're on their way here. How are we going to get $200,000? Well, wouldn't you know, they were able to pull it off in time. So the $200,000 show up, the 4 parachutes show up, and as a show of, I don't know if it's a show of grace, but if it's a show of, okay, well, you gave me my demands, he lets the passengers go, and he lets the passengers, and he lets Alice Hancock and Florence Schaffner go. So you've got the 3 gentlemen on the flight deck, and you've got Tina Mucklow still.
So CR.
Yep.
He was kind of like the James Bond of dirty criminals. I would be like the FBI person. Like, this is nothing more than a horrible criminal.
Right.
But he has become folklore to many people.
Oh, he's huge. He's a huge hero to some people, just to the fact that he was able to stick it to the man. So they refuel on the tarmac. He gets his $200,000. He gets his parachutes, and they go airborne. And he then tells them, "Okay, we're going to Mexico. I want you to fly me to Mexico." Well, it was relayed to him from the pilot through Tina that, hey, we don't have that range. We're 727. We're going to have to put down to refuel somewhere. And somewhere among that communication, Reno, Nevada was brought up. And he said, yeah, Reno's fine. Let's go there.
So what do you think at that point, like Doc and CR, like this guy is saying, sure, why not Reno? But do you think he planned that out in the first place, knowing they wouldn't have enough fuel to go to Mexico? He seems to be some kind of knowledgeable guy.
Go ahead, Dan.
I don't know. They would know how much fuel they have, what their range would be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Would he? That was the question, because he's like so smart in other areas. I guess that's it.
If he knew the answer, it's pretty easy to research, what the fuel quantity is and the range
and the consumption rate.
Yeah, for him to say, I want to go to Mexico, maybe I would say something like that because I wouldn't have no clue. But here's this guy who knows what he needs to do to get some parachutes on board, and he's going to have a comfort with jumping. He's saying, oh, I'm playing along with this, like, oh, you don't have enough to go to Mexico, then yeah, Reno sounds good. You know what I mean? Like, am I just being too analytical, or?
Well, and the one thing I didn't do was look at the range and the fuel consumption for a standard 727. But usually, if a pilot tells you, "Hey, we don't have the range," you don't have the range.
Right.
So
I have heard of them landing somewhere because they're running low on fuel, and having a fuel truck come out to them, refuel them so that they could take off and get out of there.
right.
In case something was going to go on with the plane.
Yeah.
And they didn't meet the demands, it would be bad, catastrophic.
Well, that happened in like Iran or something like that in the late 80s.
Yeah.
That's for a whole other show.
Right.
So they refuel. The passengers deboard. He gets his parachute. He gets his $200,000. They
Seattle First Bank. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I wanted to call out. Thank you, Seattle First Bank. They were, I think that was the bank where they had to get like 20 grand in order in 20s that were sequenced in a matter of what, Doc, do you think hours, and get that packed in a bag and off to the
probably.
Right.
Were they not brilliant in making it 20s? Because I've read that that's part of the thing that the hijacker wasn't wise enough to say, "Hey, give me $50 or $100 bills," because of the amount of weight that you had to jump with.
So they leave SeaTac. They're airborne, and he's in the back of the plane. Still, there's nobody on board. He's sitting in his assigned seat. He never moved. He was in 18, which is, if you look at the third engine on the top of the wing there, right where the engine starts is right where the seat would be.
Yeah.
So, and I've been on a 27 and I've sat in the back, and they are pretty loud because they got that third.
Oh, the engines are there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they get airborne, and I'm sure he's sitting back there having another Raleigh. They say he went through like a pack and a half.
We went through half a pack of Raleigh, and he only had one bourbon drink.
Right.
Because I was looking at that, like going, okay, wouldn't you be like super nervous, but you don't want to drink alcohol?
Yeah.
Yep.
So he hands Tina another note. And at this point, he said, "When you deliver this note, stay in the cockpit and shut the door." So, and you got to be asking yourself, okay, well, we know he asked for 4 parachutes, but why would they be saying stay in the cockpit? So the note said, drop to or below 10,000 feet AGL and pull all the flaps and slats out and pull the landing gear down and stay in that orientation. So they slowed the plane down. They dropped below 10,000 feet. And basically all that is a landing configuration to get the plane to go slow. So they pull the flaps and slats out. They put the landing gear down. They drop below 10,000 feet. And just as they got it configured, co-pilot Ratzik looks at Captain Scott and goes, "Hey, I have a aft stair warning light on my panel here," which that means the aft stair is down. Flew that way, and the only other thing that they got was a cabin pressure warning. The rear cabin was depressurized, which means it goes from nice and comfortable and warm to -7 Fahrenheit
Hmm.
at a snap of the finger.
And loud.
And loud. And they're at 10,000 feet.
And would Cooper have jumped right away at that point?
Probably not right away. He probably would want to get his bearings and try and get a sense of where he's jumping. You don't just, well, I'm going to say a caveat here. I have never jumped, but I have jump training with my reenacting. I was in a 101st Airborne reenacting group, and we did all the jump training, World War II jump training, but I have a working theory of what you need to do. And you're not just going to willy-nilly jump out. You need to first stand at the door and figure out where your horizon is, figure out where everything is going. And you're basically your own jump master. So you're looking at the hazards you're jumping into. So I'm sure he probably would have stood there for a couple of minutes trying to get his bearings and steel himself, because it's at this point it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
So he's jumping into nothingness, which normal people won't do. The only people that will jump into nothingness is military.
People who have done it and survived and know that it's possible, versus those of us who would never even like walk on that stairway.
Correct.
It would be terrifying. So, I am like, yeah, it's somebody who has experience with this.
Right. So they're flying around, and they're up in the cockpit. So and the door's shut. So they don't have any cameras. They can't keep an eye on DB and what he's doing. So, but they do feel when he leaves the aft ramp, because you've got to think of it as a teeter-totter.
Mm-hmm.
So that aft ramp is loaded. So when he jumps, it's going to pop up like a springboard, and it's going to fling the tail end of the aircraft into the air a little bit. And that's what they felt.
Oh, so they knew it in the cockpit.
The minute he Geronimo'd, they felt it and they knew it.
Now, would they, I think they were flying in a fixed position. Would they have known their position and the time that he jumped?
Well, 71. So GPS was not out yet. So at that time, they were using radio beacons to know their fixed location. So yeah, I mean, they could do a mathematical triangulation and figure out. I mean, they're not going to have a pinpoint spot of where they're at, but
It's not 100% far from it, probably.
Right. They probably within a couple miles figure out where they were. And that was it for that night. Was they he jumped out, and I can't remember if they continued on to Reno or if they diverted back to SeaTac, because they were still in Washington State. They weren't that far from SeaTac.
Okay.
But the only thing is, they were out over the forest.
Would they have been over water? Because that's what some speculate too. And I don't know if it was a Columbia or right off the Columbia River, but there's a lot of water where he jumped. So
Right.
that's one of the theories is like, okay, well, maybe he made it, but then he landed in water with all this parachute cord, and the temperatures being right above freezing, he wouldn't have much time to
Right.
get out of that water and save himself.
Right. So, and here's another factor that'll probably lead into Doc Z's theory. So when he demanded the 4 parachutes, if you could bring that slide back up,
Sure.
he demanded 4 parachutes, and he got 4 of them, but he got 2 different types. He got a military type, and this type is the type that I'm familiar with. It's normally this is jumped called the static line, which you clip a line to the inside of the plane, and when you jump out, it pulls your chute out of the bag for you. But these can be manually operated. So he ended up getting 2 of these, and then he ended up getting 2 sport parachutes, which the military parachutes are a round canopy. If you want to go to the next slide, please. That's the military reserve. So the military comes with 2 pieces.
Seems so little.
Well, that's your oh crap, my main didn't open. That's your lifeline right there. That has another round chute in it, and that's on your chest. You see the two little flaps up top in the back.
Yes.
Those would have metal D-rings on them, and those D-rings would clip that reserve onto your chest. Now, the interesting thing that I read in the FBI report is that he had presumably two fully functioning military sets. But it was said that one of the military reserves lacked the D-rings to attach it to the chest ring. So he had 2 military sets, and then if you go to the next slide, he was given 2 sport chutes.
Whoops, so I think it's the other way. Yep.
And the sport chute is on the right. That's called a Ram Air. The nice thing about the Ram Air is those are steerable, and those are what civilians jump, and those are what beginners use because they're highly steerable and they're highly flyable. The one on the left is the military chute. You can steer military chutes, but not so much. I mean, to steer a military chute, you got to climb your shroud line almost all the way up to the canopy to get it to turn.
Wow.
So the interesting thing was, and to parlay back with the cash, is you were correct. He didn't specify the denomination of the bill. So they got him $20 bills. And unbeknownst to him, they were all photographed with a camera, with a microfiche camera, so they could track the sequential 20s. So they could track them if they ever got into circulation.
Okay.
Well, he never specified the denomination, so they were all 20s. Think of a $200,000 worth of 20s in a bag. That's going to change your flight characteristics. And one thing that Doc Z and I read before the show is when the FBI boarded the plane when it landed, they found the reserve chute without the D-rings opened up, and all the suspension lines were cut away from the canopy, and the suspension lines were gone. So this means, well, this means that he opened that chute, he cut the suspension lines away, and he used the suspension lines to tie that bag to his chest.
Okay, because that's what those was. I was like, okay, so you've got the parachute on your front and part of your back, and then you're jumping in business clothes with like no gloves and probably business shoes. And then how do you strap this
I mean,
around?
he did leave his tie and tie tack behind. So, what? Getting this far, Doc Z, what are your theories? What do you think happened?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very well planned out thing.
Mhm.
I would imagine he probably hit some water when he came down. That would be why you would never find anything. Some would wash up on the shore. Otherwise, if it was on land, you'd find parachutes, rigging, cord, buckles, that kind of thing. But they really
Right.
never found any of that. They did
No.
find money uh, in the banks of the river.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah, I think about what you say, CR, like he's in a parish, he chooses a shoot that he's probably familiar with, perhaps from military background, but
Mhm.
it's not very steerable. And where are you going? You're dropping between Seattle and Portland, or on the way to Reno or whatever in that area, Seattle, Portland area. You've got 100-foot trees and 200-foot trees, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but my point is, plus you have the water.
Well, and it's funny
Deer,
that you
and
bring
it's
up
dark.
it's funny that you bring up the 100-foot tree. I mean, there are 100-foot trees out there, and if you get hung up in a 100-foot tree, you ain't climbing out of it.
Right. And Doc, didn't you, like, when you were a scuba diver, you scuba dive, you always have a buddy, right? So I guess parachuting, when you're a crook, you don't want to have a buddy, but that could really, like, there's somebody there to know you and got stuck in a tree. And
Yeah,
wait, what a way to die, because if you're stuck in a tree and you're alive and you
yeah,
can't get down, you are really vulnerable to any kind of animal in the area that climbs trees, but you also are going to have a miserable starving death, right?
Right. Yep.
But wait a minute, guys. Didn't those guys carry knives and stuff to cut themselves out? Or am I thinking too military?
So,
well, the thing about diving is you want to keep track of your air so that if anything happens, you have enough reserve air, and you always carry a knife to cut your way out of fishing line or whatever. Um, and then
That's
you
fair.
have a PC that you could inflate and it would shoot you right up to the surface.
So CR, a knife
Mhm.
is a big thing for a diver. Is it a big thing for a paratrooper, I would imagine?
Huge.
Yeah,
So going back into the World War II, and you've seen the jumpsuit that I have.
yeah,
Mhm.
So right about here on the zipper, there's a little secondary zipper pocket, enough to fit a little pocket knife. And they had a paratrooper pocket knife that was spring loaded, that you would, there's a little D-ring on this knife that you would tie a piece of paracord to, and you would tie that paracord to one of your epaulets, so it wouldn't drop away. But basically, you would keep those stinking razor sharp. And the theory is that anytime you got hung up in a tree, after you tied your letdown rope up, you would take that spring-loaded knife out and you would cut away your suspension lines, and then you could, if you were tangled up, usually right at your shoulders here on the harness are two hard connectors that you just pop and they'll pop away.
So would that have been Cooper's situation as well? If he did land in a tree and he was actually conscious and not killed by the impact.
If
Um,
if he didn't have injuries and he was conscious, and there's going to be a couple of things there. If you're hung up in a tree at night you can't tell how far you're up. And the second is you can't tell what's underneath you. In World War II, the fellas carried something called a letdown rope, which was just a white rope, and it was 30 feet of rope that was coiled up under, they'd hang it off of their haversack to where they could get to it. So if they're within 30 feet of the ground, they can tie it to something, they can cut their shroud lines and let themselves down. But if they're higher than that, you're kind of SOL. And I was thinking, that's kind of my theory. He either got tied up in a tree, or Doc Z's theory, he hit the water and his chute wrapped around him and drug him down, which that's happened. My other theory is, and it kind of strengthened my theory because I was reading the FBI report and I read something that the guy who packed the chutes said. So he was given 4 chutes, 2 sport chutes and 2 military chutes. Now, one of those 4 chutes was an instruction-only parachute, which means it is not to be jumped with because it will not work. It is a static display chute. Its only means is to familiarize students with the shape and size of a parachute.
And the different parts that go to it.
Correct.
So they gave him a bad chute?
They intentionally shell gamed a dud chute into his 4 parachutes.
Okay. Did he know it?
No, he did not. So, but they never said, yeah, we recovered, 3 chutes and one of them was a dud. They never said that.
So he chose well, Cooper.
He either chose well and he just had a crappy accident, or he chose poorly and he chose the dud.
Well, that's where my mind goes because, as Doc can tell you, I have way too far of an interest in murder mysteries and figuring things out. I would have first of all, we should poison them on the plane. And then secondly, we should give them all rigged parachutes. And obviously he chose 4 to check that out.
Right. Well, and my other theory is that he had a malfunction in air. It is common for your shroud lines to get wrapped up in each other. It's commonly known as a gift wrap, because basically what happens is your shroud lines get twisted, and when they twist, part of the parachute loses its air, so part of the chute will slump down, and you're only running on half of the resistance. So if your shroud lines get tangled, they teach you to pedal your legs like you're pedaling a bicycle, and that should put enough twist into it that it'll pop it out. But who knows? I mean, he's jumping at night. He's 10,000 feet. Who knows what the wind was doing that night?
Well, I think they did. I mean, they did have some wind, and it was right above freezing, and the water would have been right above freezing if he did fall into it.
Yeah.
The chute and everything tied to him.
Right.
I don't know. I just don't see that him having a little Pollyanna criminal future.
Right. And so kind of jumping into now, it's 2023, and technically the case has been paused. The search for him has been paused, but the case is open.
Did they know how old he was? Because let's say he was 30. If he was 30 when he did this, he'd be 83 now.
Let me check my notes here.
Maybe he was much younger. So
Mid 40s, business suit, black tie, white shirt.
yeah,
So
if he was in mid 40s, he's gone.
yeah.
Mystery they will never solve.
No, I mean it's 2023. The case is still active. They're not searching for him, but the case is still active. And it's not to say that there's been people who haven't called in. I mean, there's been
a
bunch of people who not only have called the FBI, but have sent in letters saying, "Hey, I'm D.B Cooper. I'm alive and well in Portland," and haha. They did find some of the cash. I think it was late 80s. There was a father-son camping trip.
I think it was right in early 80s, like 1980 itself. And
yeah.
Was it a February? It seemed to me like I'm like, wow, that was a cold month.
And the funny thing is it wasn't far off of it wasn't found far away from the Columbia bar either.
So I'm checking my notes, and that a child found it with his dad, and the child that found it was Brian Ingram.
Yep.
And they found $5,800, which they did turn over to the FBI, but they were able to keep about half of them, half of the amount that they found.
Yeah.
He took one of the $20 bills, guys, and he auctioned it off for close to $6,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So people want, like, D.B Cooper's big. It's still big.
Oh, he's huge. He's a cult legend.
Doc, you would be going after the DNA. And so that brings up the question of what DNA. You said Thai. You said he smoked cigarettes. You said he had a bourbon. What DNA was there? I mean, even they saved that evidence. They didn't have the DNA human genome map then, but they do now.
Yeah. There would have been just a sketchy amount of DNA.
Right.
If it was blood or something like that. I mean, nylon doesn't really absorb much. Water washes a lot of stuff away.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. I think I saw or read something about them trying to get enough DNA from the Thai, and it just wasn't. It wasn't enough to be able to run it. And I heard that the cigarettes would be more helpful, but that the FBI lost the cigarettes.
Right.
And the glass that he drank his bourbon from just got washed with all the other glasses.
Yeah.
So it's too bad, because I'm like, oh, I think that's the big thing about Cooper, is that people are mystified by it because it is a mystery. Did he live or die? But they're also like, well, none of the money besides the $5,800 were reported in terms of that. And what happened? What happened? Who was it? Did this guy die there? Did he live? I mean, it's such a mystery.
Well, it's kind of akin to the Alcatraz escape in the 60s of the and maybe that's another show we should do about the escape with the Anglin brothers, because they poof into the ether. Nobody's seen them since '63.
Well, I've been under that bridge on the USS Nimitz. We didn't time the tide quite right, so we had to send a welder up to cut the top part of the antenna off, or we would have hit it.
You mean to get under the bridge, you had to like
The
go up
Golden
there?
Gate Bridge.
Yeah, you're so.
You're sitting on the deck looking up, and it's a long way up there, but you don't realize how high those antennas are.
Right.
You really need that good high antenna to be picked up, as far over the horizon as you can.
Yeah, and on the Alcatraz escape theory is that they made, it's not a theory that they made homemade rafts. They made homemade rafts out of out of raincoats.
They figured out what they had. Yeah.
Yep. And the theory is that the tide was so strong that it just swept them out past the Marin headlands, and they're gone.
Yeah.
But everybody wants to say, hey, we're behind this. That was a cool idea. They made it. But I don't. People say they did. People say they didn't. And it's the same speculation with DB. He made the jump. Yeah, he lost his money, but he made the jump. Or, he had an unrecoverable problem in the air and he's dead.
But see, like somebody like me, I think about something like that. Yeah, he's dead. No way that could happen. But there was a Richard McCoy who did in 6 months, I think it was April of the next year, he jumped out of an American airline flight, and with $500,000, I think he did have larger bills then. And get this, he jumped over Utah, which might have been a safer bet. And he did survive. The reason the FBI were able to find the person who did it was that he bragged in the bar before he did it that, oh, I could totally do that, but I would ask for $500,000, blah, blah, blah. So he prophesied his own destruction.
Yeah.
They were able to go to his home. Get this, he was ex-military. Not surprising, right? Because he did a lot of the same things Cooper did. And he they found the $500,000 in his house. He had a couple kids, a wife. Apparently, they had no idea there was $500,000 in this.
Wow.
I have a hard time believing that, but
yeah.
But anyway, it is doable. I guess that was my point, is that it could have happened. Now, the FBI investigated this McCoy, and he had really different physical characteristics, and he just did not fit Cooper. So they did investigate him, thinking, well, maybe we got Cooper, right?
Right. Funny that you mentioned a copycat. Here's another one that I found, and I'm reading a little excerpt here. On July 11th, 1980, a Cooper copycat, right down to the mirrored aviator sunglasses, attempt to hijack a Boeing 727 Northwest Flight 608, bound for Portland at the Seattle airport as it was taxiing. A 17-year-old Glenn Kurt Tripp claimed to have a bomb and demanded a ransom of $100,000 and 2 parachutes. A quick-thinking stewardess slipped 3 Valiums into Tripp's drink, and the plane never left the ground. It is easy to
love that story.
That would be me.
It is easy to feel sorry for these guys, but
it's like, sorry, I'm going to deviate.
Yeah.
I'm going to diverse, but isn't it a little funny? Like, you're able to find Valium, like, either in your own purse or somebody else who worked for the airline.
Well,
or did you just go to your passenger? Maybe they carry that medicinally. I don't know.
And I'm thinking, okay, so the stewardess slipped them Valium, but as the FAA, I'm going to be going, ma'am, where'd you get the Valium? Do you have a prescription for that?
That's hysterical, and I so would do it if I could do that.
Right.
So what happened?
He didn't make it out?
No, he let's pull it back up here.
Did he pass out?
During the 10-hour standoff, Tripp lowered his demands and released all 52 of the passengers, settling for 3 cheeseburgers and a demand to be driven from the airport in a rental car by 2 pilots left with him. When the on-scene FBI negotiator Ron Beener said the cheeseburgers will take a while, Tripp responded with, "Forget the cheeseburgers. You said before you'd get the plane, and you didn't. So you'd better get the car. This is your last chance. Car arrived moments later. Tripp came down the steps. In seconds, he was jumped by FBI agents hiding under the plane. The briefcase was shoved up against his chest and snatched away. Later, it was revealed that the suitcase had no bomb, only a jacket. Convicted of first-degree kidnapping and extortion, but was sentenced to only 20 years probation.
Wow.
And you know what's funny?
He was lucky because he didn't even have to serve time.
This crackpot tried it again in 83.
I was going to say, where is the deterrent if you do nothing?
So Thursday, January 20th, 1983, while on probation for his 1980 skyjacking attempt, Tripp, now 20, tried hijacking the same flight, Northwest Flight 608, as it approached Portland International Airport from Seattle. This time he was armed with a shoebox, and he was only demanding to be flown to Afghanistan after complaining that the United States was not helping his people and that he had not been able to see his wife and child there, as he claimed to have been in prison the last 10 years. His story later was discounted by law enforcement officials. After a 3-hour standoff at 4:30 p.m., he had agreed to unload half of the 35 passengers who were exiting the plane via the exit ramp, as 2 FBI agents standing on shoulders of others climbed through the cockpit windows. Surprise Tripp made a sudden motion with the box as if to throw it at the agent, and the agent fired a single shot from his .38 revolver, killing Tripp instantly and ending the 3-hour standoff.
That's how it should go.
And the cops figured out that his story about Afghanistan was a ruse.
Otherwise, the SEALs could have taken care of that.
Right. So, well, we're coming up on time here, but before we ended it, we were talking about being hung up in a tree in a parachute and trying to get down. And years ago, I had a friend of mine that was in the U.S. Army Airborne during Grenada. And when they jumped in, they jumped out of a C-130, and he was always the first one to jump off of the ramp. And as practice, as soon as the green light went, he went out the door. So he was group lead, but his thing that he loved to do is as soon as he cleared the door, he would turn around on his back, because they weren't doing static jumps at the time. They were pulling their own chutes. But he would turn around on his back so he could watch his guys exit the plane. Well, as soon as he turns around on his back, he can see the red and green exit lights in the plane go from green to red, and the plane takes a bank and banks off to the right. They missed him.
See, guys,
So
down here.
he pulls his chute, lands, but he gets hung up in a tree. And it's not just any tree, it's a spiny palm tree.
Yikes.
So, and we're going to go a little longer than 10 seconds, but so maybe hour and a half later, his boys find him. They're all on the ground. They all made it. He's hanging up in this tree. And unfortunately, the shock of him opening up his chute, his bag ripped off. So he didn't have a knife on him. He didn't, but so they're on the ground, and the good old Doc goes, "Oh, I got a knife." So he played catch the knife with the Doc for 2 hours.
Wow.
Finally got the knife, goes to put it up to a suspension line. Just, as he's cutting the line, the Doc goes, Oh, wait, it's razor sharp.
Oh,
And he wasn't ready for it. And he ended up on his butt on the ground.
oh,
But
didn't break anything. Hopefully,
no,
I
that
think I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
yeah,
MS. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, definitely. I would say if I were gonna do what DB did, I would have chose the sport shoot, and I would have done it during the day.
I would have been at least had gloves on and a pair of boots. I mean, that wouldn't have thrown anybody. Just
Right.
dress for the occasion.
Right.
Dress for the occasion.
So, well, that's the end of our show tonight. I wanted to thank you two for coming on tonight, and
Thanks, CR. It's been fun.
we talked about this subject all the way up until like I don't know, a couple minutes ago. So we really didn't run out of gas on it. And you could probably spend more time on it and go down some other avenues that we didn't
if we start getting into the details, yeah, you could.
So I'm thinking maybe at some point in time we should probably do a show on the Anglin brothers, the 63 Alcatraz escape. I think that would be interesting to touch on.
So two of the three guys that may have escaped were brothers.
Yes, the Anglin brothers. And I think they ended up killing the third guy. Or the third guy drowned or something like that.
Well, I think there's a National Geographic on that one as well.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Tell everybody that I think the best documentary on Cooper was the National Geographic one. There's several out there, but
right.
National Geo seems to do a pretty good job.
Yep. So before we sign off here, let's go ahead and tell them what we're doing next week. For many of you know that I volunteer at the Minnesota Transportation Museum in St. Paul. I work out there with a bunch of guys. I work on the G model or the G scale model railroad. And then I'm also a diesel locomotive mechanic out there. And there's a couple of guys that I work with doing the mechanic stuff that we do a podcast every now and then. Next week, we're going to be doing a show on just railroad stuff in general. We'll touch on G scale. We'll touch on the museum. What we do. We'll have Brady on, and he and I will talk about what we do out there as far as keeping history alive with these not only diesel locomotives, but steam locomotives.
Hey, CR, I got to tell you, I love the G scale. I just like when I see one, I want to pick it up and hold it. And then when you look at what you have set up with your N scale, the N scale is so tiny compared to the G scale.
Yep.
And you can soak a lot of money into G, whatever scale you like.
That's the problem about it is it can get cost prohibitive. We're going to talk about that next week. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking about another controversy that happened in 1943, fall of, and that deals with the United States Navy and the Department of, or no, it would have been War Department at that time. They weren't split yet. So it would have been the War Department. And basically what we're talking about is the Philadelphia experiment. Right. Some people seem to think that it was a degaussing experiment. And degaussing, basically what that is you run bare wires on the outside of the ship or antenna arrays outside the ship to minimize the cross section of the ship to magnetic mines.
Magnetic mines, and to have something to do with radar as well.
Yes,
radar detection.
It'll diffuse your radar cross section.
Mm-hmm.
It'll make an aircraft carrier maybe look like a destroyer. But a lot of people seem to think that the Philadelphia experiment was time travel. They did have some very notable scientists, mainly Albert Einstein, in on this project. He worked a lot of his theories into this project.
Nikola Tesla.
What's that?
Nikola Tesla.
Yeah, I think he did work with Tesla on this. I don't think Tesla had the lead, but I think they were both working on it together.
That have to do with Einstein's like unified field theory or field.
Unified field theory, yes.
And the strange thing too is like, okay, we're talking about, and one thing Doxy has always said, well, we know what came out of that was degaussing or this kind of cloaking, but it's very explainable. But what we don't know, and what there's a lot of conspiracy about, is like, not only did they say it made you or the degaussing or the experiment made them cloaked for radar, it also actually made them invisible to the naked eye. And then there was teleportation. People said that the ship went through teleportation. It's a crazy story. Very interesting.
Well, and actually, the funny thing is I found out when I started researching this, I laughed because there was a 1990 edition of a Greek Playboy magazine. And in that magazine was an article about this ship. Because after she was stricken off the record for the United States Navy, we sold her to Greece. And she was a destroyer for Greece for a number of years, being retired. So there was a centerfold article in the Greek Playboy in like 1990 about this ship.
How often do we sell battleships and aircraft carriers and all?
All the time.
Yeah,
I guess I haven't thought about that.
It's cheaper and it makes us money to sell them off rather than turn them into a museum ship or scrap them.
Costs a lot to scrap them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, we are above time, and I wanted to thank you guys again for coming on. That made it go really easy. I think I'm gonna go lay down and
Oh, you have another show tonight, don't you? With
Actually, no, we rescheduled that. So
okay, well that's good.
A lot of my viewers don't know I've been dealing with some back pain lately. So if you want to send healing vibes or whatever you want to do or pray, send a prayer up or send some healing vibes. I'm gonna go get it looked at on Wednesday, but kind of hard sitting in a dining room chair for an hour, but I think I'm going to go just enjoy my Friday night.
Okay, well, take care, CR.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and tune in again next week for trains. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, CR. You too.
And here I am, Doxy. How you doing?
I vote CR. I vote for CR.
There was a big picture of me in here. big picture. Oh.
Mm-hmm. Good light.
And my little light, that works really well.
A good light looks,
Yeah.
looks good.
Yeah.
CR does his work, you know. I'm thinking, okay, sure, you're going to be able to talk about this for an hour. Well, he's just really good. He does his background work. I mean, he does tell it like a story that's interesting.
Yep. All right.
He's definitely a storyteller.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. He's got the gift of gab. Okay. So we got a watch. We got a phone. Yeah.
How do you think I do with photos?
You do great.
Well, then, Franklin, it's still sit on the $200,000. Where the hell did this thing do? Getting the gear on me.
And if you gave him a bogus shoe and he fell to his death, he's not going to see.
Well, as far as we know, there's some skeleton hanging from a tree out there. I mean, there's a lot of wilderness plants. It's not like you could just get a helicopter up and see everything.
Well, so that's the river.
The Columbia, you jump by that,
Columbia. Yeah.
but it's like,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Isn't that where?
well, I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild river, and it gets really cold and the winter, and just like down, walk I tried to like the coffee cat that made it, he jumped out over Utah, but that was smarter.
Yeah. A little bit warmer there. No running water. Unless you're going over.
It's weird because D.B Cooper had enough information to be a parachuter and stuff, that you're like down to some of the other ones, like. I mean, that's not one of the best places to jump. You
Right.
want some wilderness, but you don't want to have like all that water with that shoot that you can't direct.
Well, and then that kind of goes back to my theory. What if all the shoots that they gave him looked good, but were bogus? And as soon as he pulled the cord, the thing would like stream her out and fall to the ground, or it would cut in half and flop, flail around.
Yeah.
You just plummet to the depth and never get it.
Well, that's what I think, you know, and somehow that, some of it ended up in the river, that's not too surprising.
Right?
It's, so I signed up for this North Idaho Fire Walk. Somebody says we live in Coeur d'Alene and we have absolute falling.
Wow. You could ask Bob about that, I would think. Bob lives there. So will Gary live there?
Yeah, I just text, put them a screenshot.
So Connie, Jason, Teresa, Bob.
Yeah, they all live at Katie. Or we Katie. Katie.
Watch it.
I come get flowers.
Flower. Really?
And I guess when you hold her on their back, it's called her food. Well, that's the kind of fun to do. Oh, yeah, what helped us keep you this long. I definitely will. You be my little potato. Our little potato.
Right, no sugar.
So that's
Right, no sugar.
no sugar added. I love some with some strawberries.
Not great.
Yep.
Really, crispy honey.
Great. Well, yeah, when you hold her back, it's all the food.
Oh, that's cool. A lot of animals do that. Right.
That little potato food eats.
Yeah,
Can't doubt that.
that's exercise.
You
But,
eat that a lot. That should be an hour. Yeah. Cookie salad. Cookie salad. Yeah, that's what I call her all the time. Cookie love salad. Cookie potato. Love salad.
I was so happy to see you.
And you're gonna love salad. Oh, she's cute.
little butterfly hanging out. Right.
I just thought of yesterday, it's me like last night. Okay. Yeah, all that. No, I just said still to Jerry, we also know that. But it's been good, it's not too sugar, it's good. I'll call it out, so. Once that has recently expired, so I need to know, that we don't go on that today, it's like, good ice cream. Definitely. I, Oh, really? I don't know how far, maybe 7 miles. What is that? What is the whole about? Where you have something back in your office, right? You did some phone numbers off or something, I don't know. Okay. I'm not ready to go to bed. That's on you. Okay, but you shut off my DVD. So he wants to go to bed. So I will set it on. Cookie, you want to go pee? Let's go pee. You want to go pee? Yes, you want to go pee. Okay, you go to bed. Oh, I guess it is 9:30. Now, Papa, what you do is you scoop her up, you take her into bed, and you let her get under the covers.
Yeah. That's how I do.
Well, she's here in the dining room. She's not ready to pick up.
That's how I do. All right. Oh, look, I'm back. Look at me. Look at me. StreamYard.